This is the President McCormack Podcast with your host, Mark McCormack.
So Landon, right off the flipping bat, dude, tell us about your background, man. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up I was born in San Jose, California, but I consider Oregon home. Grew up from 8 to 18 in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. In the rain.
How do you feel about Portland now?
Portland has changed a lot. It doesn't quite seem like home anymore. When I go like to the other cities south of Portland, it's great. Downtown is not. Yeah. It's not what it used to be.
I used to love Portland.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite cities of all time.
Agreed.
But it sucks because keep Portland weird's a thing. Yeah. But now it's like really weird. It's like bad weird. It used to be fun weird.
Agreed.
Yeah. So the food there is fantastic.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. What's your favorite restaurant there? Or what you remember?
McCormick's is good. There's some other like little dive places that I like to go, like little Mexican place, a little sushi's really good there. Yeah.
Did you ever go to Swiss Hibiscus?
No, never went to Swiss Hibiscus. Sorry.
It's like a top 5 restaurant of mine.
Okay.
Time. And if it's out of business now, I'm going to cry my eyes out because, COVID was brutal to restaurants there. One of the things that if people are listening to this, that's cool about Portland, there's 2 culinary art schools there.
Yeah. And
they spin off these students, right? And they'll put a restaurant in a location that can hold 30 people.
Yeah.
So they're really, I don't know, they're cool.
Yeah.
It's probably the best way to put it.
They also have like these, basically a whole blocked off for food carts, essentially. So there's tons of people that will create a restaurant in a food cart test environment and just get to test it really quickly. So you can just walk a block and pick one of the 50. Right. Food trucks.
It wasn't like right across the street from like the original Voodoo Donuts.
Yeah.
Which is a very pedestrian donut, by the way, everyone.
A lot of sugar.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever had a Heavenly Donut there?
A Heavenly? No.
They have like 4 locations. They're
So I'm normally tiny. Like the safe, boring person, right, in the room, and but I definitely went and got the cock and balls because that's like you have to try it. Like that's it's just yeah. It's just cream filled. Yeah. So there you go. That's the most risque you'll ever hear me talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, it's 3. Yeah. So if that's a good attention grabber.
I love that.
Yeah. So Portland's great. The rain can really depress people. Sports was I was in a gym, so I didn't notice that it was raining so much, and that was life.
So what took you out of Portland?
College. Yeah, I came to Utah for BYU. Studied statistics there, and I nerded out in that corner.
Any reason you went to BYU? Any ties to BYU?
Or? Family ties, but like not for what you think. Like my sisters went there. I didn't really like. I was going to a school in Arizona or Utah is basically what I thought, and obviously my uncle was pretty famous there, but it was more of my sisters that went there. So I was.
Was that more the determining factor?
Yeah, it was like they went there. They had great experiences, and so for me it was. I was looking forward to it, and BYU is known for a really good school. Hopefully I could afford it.
You got a degree in stats.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the few programs that have undergrad statistics they have. So I felt like I was Peter Pan. I looked the part too. So that worked out well. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I did feel like business was a soft skill. So I wanted to learn a hard skill. And so statistics to me was a little bit of like, how do I really break into like saying, I know this really well. And Moneyball, before Moneyball was a thing, I was all about stats and was going to go work for professional teams and scouting. I was like, look, I played on a nationally ranked basketball team. I know sports, right? Let's do this. And then I actually played with Kevin Love in high school, and he went on to be a player of the year. Really? Yeah, so we traveled the country playing, and I was like, look, I've seen the best coaches in the world, and they don't know how to like make instantaneous decisions when it matters most. When the pressure's on the line, how do you make decisions of subbing and things of these things? And I felt like you could quantify those things. And
so anyways, side note with Kevin Love, were you around when he was in the documentary?
Which documentary are you talking about?
He was in one. Yeah, it was high school to college documentary. He was in there with like Kyle Singer. I think.
Kyle Singler. Yeah, he went.
Yeah.
We played them in the state championship.
Oh,
They were
okay.
the only team we lost to our senior year. We lost them once in a tournament, once there. But we traveled the country. We never lost to any team across the whole country. We lost to that team.
Oh, nice.
Bringing up old scars here. No.
So are you still friends with Kevin?
Not really. Like we were friends the first couple of years as an all-star, and then I went on my mission and came back and kind of touched base, but not really. Like he's a great guy. I love the platform he's taken. But that's how I actually got into scouting. Was other old teammates that I had got into coaching in the NBA and reached out to me while I was working at Goldman out of school and just doing part-time scouting of, teams, not players, but teams.
Yeah. So do you mess in the scouting still, or are you done with that?
No, I don't. Business has become my thing that I love. That's my Rubik's Cube. Yeah. Also, like I got a job out of school, or I got offered a job to work for an agent to help them quantify the value of players. And it was a hard life. I got to observe it as a young age of watching what sports was like as a career. Yeah. And it's tough. Yeah. It's tough on families and other things. So I wasn't married out of school, and I was like, I want to get married, I want to figure that out. Yeah.
So did your sports, did it come from your uncle at all? Just in case anyone's going back, Danny Ainge is your uncle.
Yeah.
But
he's related to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's your uncle, right? You're not his nephew.
Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, to be honest, he's my dad's little brother, right? So Danny had two older brothers. They beat him up. He was, he learned to be tough. And so, sports was inherent. Like, didn't matter what sport I was playing it growing up. And so, when you watch basketball and you watch sports as much as I was, it's just inherent. But I also didn't exactly grow to realize that being a reality long term. So I think at 14, I realized that's not a reality for someone like me. Yeah. And that was okay. I was surprised because I actually got offers to walk on and play at some small schools, which I didn't ever think I would get. And that was nice. Yeah. But, it makes you be a little bit more balanced when hey, that's not your life. Yeah. So
that's an interesting thing with me because my parents, I'm large, right? So I'm 6'7". I weigh 265 as of today. This is actually the size I was in high school. Wow. Enough. A little more muscly now, but
I was like 130 wet. Like,
were you really?
Freshman year, I was under 5 foot, under 100 pounds. So when I say I realized that goal early, or the lack of goal, it was like, this is reality.
See, for me, it was interesting too because my dad is a Scottish immigrant, right? So I'm first generation American, and so I didn't grow up in a family that loved sports. In fact, most of the time we weren't allowed to watch sports on Sunday, right? And so, but then as I became a better athlete, I kind of was introduced to that world a tad, but then I broke my back when I was on my mission. And I had that moment, so I broke it. I went through the national health system in Scotland. Don't get me going on that. It's a bunch of crap. 9 months later, I ended up finally having an MRI in a private hospital, and they're like, "Dude, you ruptured a disc. You have to have surgery like now." So they flew me home. Ended up having surgery, and my doctor is Dr. Robert Berry. His son Matthew Berry was the quarterback at BYU at the time, and I played center. And so he had come to me and basically, after I woke up, he was one of the first people I saw, and he said, "Hey, just to let you know, your football career is over. Like it's done.
You're back."
And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I kind of accepted it, right? Part of me hates that I accepted it, and other parts of me is really glad I accepted it. Yeah. But it's an interesting moment in time when you realize it's like, sports isn't your thing, dude. Like you're gonna have to pick something else. Yeah. You have this massive plethora of things you can go into.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love that it's a balance, right? I have a lot of friends who are they've either been professional athletes or they were in college, and sports kind of teaches you to be obsessed about something, and you kind of like learn you learn the work ethic associated with it, but you like don't know how to not work, if that makes sense. A lot of the athletes, like they're just redirecting that energy towards something else. Yeah. And so I think for me, it was helpful to learn balance in different areas and lots of different areas. Whereas a lot of my friends that were in that world, like they have to obsess over something, and I love it. And that's good. Like it teaches a work ethic that you can't have in other areas. So
do you feel like professional athletes are able to make that transition better into the business world now?
I think they're being forced to. I think it's just an education standpoint. It's like when the internet came out, everything is now accessible. Well, now investment is becoming more accessible, right? It's forced in the day-to-day world. And so I would say they're becoming better and worse. They're being exposed to it no matter what. And sometimes that means I work with professional athletes for some things. I bring them like some brand deals for businesses that might make sense, or they come to me about investment. And some of them should probably just realize it's not their thing and outsource, and therefore their thing needs to be evaluating trust more than hype. That's what I'll say. And some people, they're perfect mindset, but I think more athletes need to seek more balance early on, right? Like, it helps you to learn about investing. It helps you learn about like Jaylen Brown's the best example I like, right? Like he talks about chess. He talks about all these other things. He's a musical instrument. When you change your mind, you change your capability in all aspects of life, including sports. And so I think that flexibility of changing how your mind works gives you empowerment that you can have through the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I look at NFL players. I tried to set up a private equity fund probably 10 years ago now with nothing but NFL guys. And it was wild to me because we were with a couple agents. One of them was Baker Mayfield's agent, right? At the time, they just signed his rookie deal, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And they were going to retired players and active players, and these dudes were having a hard time coming up with $100,000.
Yeah.
And it was like blowing my mind because I'm like, how are you guys mismanaging this so horribly? And then you look at the parity into the NBA, right? Those guys have more money than they know what to do with.
I think it's a balance there. Like I do think, like let's look at contracts. Baseballs has the biggest contracts. So like, if we're going to talk about who has money, it's baseball players, generally speaking. Yeah. There's exceptions in basketball. I think it's also lifestyle, right? Like there's lifestyle creep that happens when you come to the NFL, and certain people should realize that they're living their lives on a short timeline of their careers are going to be 3 to 5 years, right? And so you should start planning that now, right? Like Matthew Dellavedova is one of my favorite stories. They used to make fun of him because he couldn't afford his contract, right? Or he didn't even have a contract when he was playing with the Cavs with LeBron and Kevin Love and Kyrie. And so he'd take home all the meals that they had in the team room, and people would make fun of him. And it was like, are you kidding me? Like you're making fun of someone who's barely surviving and had to make their way in it. And like, that should be like the encouraging fact of those aspects. And so there's certain aspects of sports that culturally just kind of kill it. Like you don't have to be killing it and going out to do everything. You just need to like figure out what game you're playing. And you're going to play blackjack different than you're going to play roulette. It's the same way I talk about with my investor friends. You play venture capital different than you play private equity. You just have to make sure you know what career game you're playing or what investment game you're playing when you play it. So we're kind of all over the place, but I just like the conversation of like, I tie those worlds together all day, every day. It's like,
well, so do I, right? Because no matter what, you have to perform in business some way. Yeah. Right. And I think it's interesting for football players and for basketball players. I don't know that many baseball players, so I kind of put them to the side, but it's interesting to see how they re-engage with the world. So like in my fund, right, we have Jimmer Fredette and we have Austin Collie, right? Both very successful in very different ways, right? And watching them kind of fold into the business world, because now they're at a very high-end level, right? They're raising money and we're doing big deals and there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of high-level networking, right? That actually happens. And it's interesting watching them kind of deal with people, right? Because they were heroes to some people and their sports careers. On this other side, they're kind of like the bros. It's kind of like you're gonna have to now make your name on this side of the table. Yeah,
I think we all go through that, right? Like I've had to change industries, chosen to change industries like 5 different times, like from the financial services Goldman world to private equity, where I was buying cash flowing businesses, to I went to Overstock and I ran the mobile commerce division, to venture capital. I worked for a venture capital fund to startup, right? I was one of the co-founders of Gab Wireless, and, from 0 to 2.5 million our first 13 months, like those are all very different worlds. And every step of the way I had to, recreate myself. And then I went to syndication and venture stuff. And then I've started a debt company, right? Each one of those things is an iteration. And so I think defining yourself by what you do is really limiting. And then as you get down that path, like you just being comfortable, being uncomfortable is kind of the principle. And athletes are really good at that. Like peak pressure moment, like when you're at the edge of competition and they're not sure if they're going to win or lose, like that's where most professional athletes actually thrive. When you think about what drives them to it, it's that moment of I'm uncomfortable, but that's where I'm growing the most. Yeah. And that's the business principle that I love. Someone asks, like, when are you at your best? And I'm like, when I'm not sure if I'm going to win or not. Like, I might be teetering on the point of I might be past my depth, like just at that edge. And that's where I'm like, that's the fun moment. And athletes should have that same perspective. I'm surprised by the number of athletes that think that they can't handle that, because they're totally capable. Yeah. It's just a being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Like it's,
Well, that's a real good point.
I don't know.
Like one of the top 5 things you need to be good at, learn how to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Learn how to be comfortable when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think also it's like when you aren't willing to do that, you can't learn. And so that's really hard. So I point to that uncomfortableness, and then like forgiveness, and a couple others that I point to that, like, for me, have been really important in my life that lead me to like being able to progress, just because I have a lot of friends that are late 40s, 50s, and 60s. So that's kind of weird, but I just prefer those type of conversations. And I learned a lot from my friends that went through business breakups or divorces, and that's like learning from their lack of forgiveness, I'll say, some of the times, and learning from those that did, like that was huge for me. So learning and like being uncomfortable, because learning is just like, crap, I'm going to mess up. Yeah. Good. Do it more.
Well, I think part of learning too, right, is you need to be coachable, which is one of the things that athletes are actually excellent at. Yeah. Right. Is they can be one of the best and still take advice from somebody, where I think it's really easy for people to get a habit of like, well, I'm the man. They kind of built themselves to that ego point, and then instead of still being able to pivot inside of there, they like lock themselves into some sort of mindset, I guess, without being too broad.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. Like, it comes from like some sort of humbling failure. Like, I don't know if you've dealt with this in the past, but for me, the people that have like been successful, like from 14 on, right? Like, it actually is the worst curse you could ever have, right? Like, because you didn't learn how to react to the failure. And let's be honest, like if you're in sports, you react to failure, but it's different. Like, or someone that built their first company was the best company they've ever built, and then they exit. Unfortunately, that's the worst thing you could ever learn, because you learn that you have the Midas touch, and you learn that nothing you touch is going to go wrong. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not how life works. Like, and like, if you didn't learn it then, you're going to learn it. And so it's just a matter of, like you're saying, that ability to be coachable usually comes from those humbling moments when things screwed up. So I'm a good example of like a lot of things screwing up early on and saying, I'm much more wise now because I screwed up so much, and I'm grateful for that. Like,
well, I like both sides of the coin. Like, some people, they feel like the teachable moments are when they mess up, and I actually like the other side of it. I'm like, when you win, you need to realize what you left on the table. Yeah. Right. Instead of getting, quote unquote, drunk off of your win. Yeah. Right. Like, you need to be like, yeah, you made $10 million, but you could have made 60.
Yeah.
Because you didn't plan your way into it. Right. Makes sense. Right.
Yeah. I see that a lot from repeat founders, and they're like, I'm going to do it better this time. Well, that shows progress, right? Like, they're like ready to be uncomfortable again and jump into it. Not, well, I did mine. That's good. And let's see if you all can keep up.
Yeah. So with your debt company, how does that work? How have you structured it?
So I'll start with the origin because it's important. So many people are coming to me for equity, and partially because they think it's really exciting to raise venture for some reason. We've done a really good job in venture capital to market how amazing it is to raise venture capital. Probably the best marketing campaign over the last 10 years, honestly. So once they've seen that and they want to attract it, they think, oh, money is the solution to my problems. And they came to me and trying to ask for equity or think about who they should talk to. And I was kind of tired of it because I was like, look, venture fits for less than 3% of companies. So for everybody else, you have to be profitable. This thing called making money and putting profits to the bottom line. So why don't you use debt? Like debt for things that are predictable, equity for things you haven't figured out.
Yeah.
And the problem is if you haven't figured it out, there's only a certain few people that will give you the money for it. So the debt company is just basically saying we're free to entrepreneurs to help them find what lending options are available to them. And then the lenders will pay us. So banks are great. They usually have the best rates. They're usually the slowest and least flexible. And they usually have 2 products, like term loan and a line of credit. Maybe you might get them to do equipment financing. But for everything else, or if you need more flexibility, or if you need a lower amount, or you're in an industry they don't like, you have to go to this thing called private credit. And that private credit is just basically rich people lending or people that created a fund to lend. And there's a lot of those.
Is that how you guys set it up? Did you do a fund or you?
So we're neither. We're actually just the aligned incentives in the space. We're basically a glorified broker through a technology solution that will get people pre-qualified and vetted for the right type of topic. Because you can plug your information into a platform and can say, hey, you're pre-qualified for this, but it's probably not the right solution for you, to be honest. If you're pre-qualified, I believe you could probably get a better offer somewhere else. And so because there's all these new private credit funds out there, they don't know how to market themselves. And when they do, they get unqualified people to reach out. And so we vet people on that end, get the documentation, try to understand the business owner's goals, and then we work backwards from there. And so the lenders pay us because they want to be deploying their capital into the right companies that fit. And the entrepreneurs, we're free to them, saving them probably 20 to 40 hours, depending on what process they're going into.
Is it always straight debt, or do you guys do like?
There is some venture
maybe?
debt that has some warrants with it, but we try to stay, when I wear my initiator hat, like that's the company, like I'm talking about debt. A lot of people try to say, hey, I want to talk debt, and then they want to switch it to equity. And I'm like, that's not, I have a whole team dedicated just to debt, so I can make sure that they're not talking equity. Cause
Why do you think people move to equity so quick? Is it just how they understand it?
Yeah. I mean, short-term problems that they think money is the solution. So why not use other people's money with not the requirement to pay it back? You really get to see like what people believe when they're like, oh, you actually have to pay this back in a certain time frame. And they're like, well, I don't know about that. And I'm like, well, I thought this was a sure bet thing. Like it's not a sure bet thing. So equity is never a sure bet. Like, so debt, you have to be very confident of what you're doing. So I think there's like 3 tiers. The founder that just wants to pay themselves, and so they're trying to raise equity so they can pay themselves to go accomplish it. The founder that like thinks they're going to go take over the world, but hasn't validated with customers its sales enough to like prove it. And then there's like the founder that saw initial success and is like, okay, let's go. Or, and most of those can be proven with time. Like I said, most companies shouldn't raise venture because you have to be crazy to do it. Because you're saying, I'm going for $1 billion or $2 billion. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Why take on the risk? You're actually increasing the risk that your company fails and that you lose all the money of what you've built in the past if you take on venture, because you're like shoving way more gasoline or jet fuel into the jet that's about to go up. And it's like, when you do that, some things can happen.
Yeah.
And so if you really believe in what you're doing, like, you're going to do it, that's the option.
Yeah.
which is weird coming from a VC guy.
No, I think you're right. I think one of the problems with financial tools is people just don't understand what they're for.
Yeah.
Right. I say this a lot, so I try and bring in a lot of deals, right? And a lot of the time I've asked people, I'm like, have you tried to get an SBA loan? And
Oh yeah.
they're like, no. And I'm like, dude, it's the cheapest money you're ever gonna get, bro.
That's my favorite comment. People come,
Yeah.
what's the cheapest money you can get me? And I'm like, well, let's set the baseline. SBA is at 11% right now. So that's the lowest. That's government approved for funding. That's the cheapest you can get. And they're like, oh crap. Like, it's interesting to watch the reactions, but also they're afraid of the personal guarantee of SBA. It's like, do you not believe that this is going to be successful? Okay, then why should I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I flip that conversation on the equity standpoint.
Yeah.
Our company's going to be so amazing. Then why are you giving me the equity? Like, honestly, like, why would you give me the equity if it's worth so much?
What do people say?
The real truth comes out that they're going to die, right? Like, people raise venture because their companies are going to die because they're burning cash. And so it's a bit of a humbling moment when they actually realize that. Like, it doesn't mean two things can be true. They can still be the $1 billion, $5 billion, $20 billion potential and be ready to die next week. I've experienced that at Gab. We almost died like 6 times in the first year. Like, it was literally like, do we have money to get to the next step? And it was like Christmas. Oh my gosh. Our first Christmas, getting phones out to kids. I thought for sure we were going to die. Like, it was like, how much money are we putting on credit card conversations? Like, that's reality. But it's because there's a bigger mission or a bigger company you have to go after.
Yeah. So with your fund, your company,
Yeah.
what's your ideal amount that you guys lend?
Yeah, so for lending, it's typically to any company doing, call it about 500,000 is the lowest end. My team would hate me for saying that. Like $1 million in revenue to 40 million. Yeah. And we can lend as low as like 100K to those companies, depending up to 10 million tranche. I think if you're looking for more than 10 million, banks are definitely your best bet. Yeah. It's just, sometimes we'll do ones that are bigger, but they're in industries that banks just don't like.
Yeah. Do you have banks in your network, or do you kick them to a bank?
We'll kick them to a bank, right? Yeah. Banks don't have it in their business model that they would ever pay us for that scenario. And so we don't want to get in the way of a transaction. Just say, you're bank qualified. Let's get you to a bank. Like, the best solution for you is over there, not in our shop. Yeah.
So if someone, what covenants do they have to make inside your guys' loans? Like outside of a personal
That's what I'm saying.
guarantee?
We have 90 different private credit funds, so each one has different terms and different structure. And so that's why we start with, what do you need the money for? Where are you actually at? And what are you going to use it for? Yeah. And then we can work backwards. Okay, no, equipment loan is actually what you need. And this is the group. And versus, you could consider a term loan here, or here's a line of credit. It's less money than what you were asking for, but better rates and more flexible. So, but most private credit loans are somewhere between 3 and 12 months long. And then rates right now, anywhere from like 9 to 24%, depending on how risky you look. And it's not about what you're promising, but it's what you look like on paper, which those are two different perspectives. Point to the accountant in the room.
See, it's interesting to me because I did hard money brokering for like 4 years, right? Right when I turned 30.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me to watch hard money guys loan, right? Because they loan for 2 reasons. Mm-hmm. Number one, they think that you can do it. Or 2, they want your asset.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
And it was, I'd bring deals in, I'd build the packet, right? And then I would take it and shop it to like 5 different guys, right? All illegal. I like to mention that to people. I didn't have a broker's license, right? But it was interesting to see people go all the way through these things. I was actually really successful at it. And some of them were like awesome business deals and everyone won, right? Yeah. And the other ones, dudes are just getting wrecked. And it's like,
businesses, it's hard, man. Businesses are just like, it's really hard to evaluate the credit worthiness of a business, right? Yeah. Like, are they actually going to be able to pay this back? Yeah. A lot of people want to lend to real estate, bridge loans to real estate. Like, we have some private investors that'll come to us and be like, hey, I want to lend to real estate because I know I can't lose. Like I lend 60%, 65% of the value right now is what's common for banks or private credit groups. And so if they default, they're like, cool, I just bought it for 65 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
And it might take longer to get their money out, but they feel like they won. You were going to say something about the businesses when you were like, there are people that wanted them to lose and wanted to win.
Yeah.
Was there something else you were going to bring up there?
Yeah, it was interesting to me, especially in America. It's the good and bad part of America, right? Like anyone here can flourish.
Create solutions. Right? Yeah.
But when it doesn't mean that when you try, it's going to work, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I've done in my career is I've actually taken a lot of, I've taken over businesses, right?
Yeah.
Mostly because they owe me money, right? Yep. So then I end up going to their business and I'm looking at people that do their accounting in Excel and I'm just, it like blows my mind how unsophisticated most small businesses are.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to lending on the lending side, right, it's like wildly difficult to lend to these people because they don't understand basic business concepts.
That's true.
And I'm a very heavy accounting guy, right? I'm really more of a CFO than I'm anything else, right? Because I just like to sit in the data and read the reports, not, like managerial accounting more, right? And because I feel like you can look at the heartbeat of a business by watching how their financials are built, right? And you can also say, hey, you guys, this product makes way more money than this one. Pick one, and make them streamline going down the road. Do you guys get into business consulting at all with the people you loan money to?
We don't, because it just would be so time intensive. We want to be available to help as many companies. That's the reason why we're free to the business, right? Like, we're not going to answer the call the second time if you're wasting our time, obviously, but like that helps align incentives where we're actually there to get you the right solutions. Yeah. There are a lot of people that need it. I would say entrepreneurs are great at finding solutions and they're not good at finance, but that's why we built what we built, which is like, okay, this is what you think you need, but this is what you actually need. Yeah. Or one of the things I love talking, or my team has been talking to people about that I love, is contract financing. It's like, hey, you don't actually need more money. You just need more sales. Or when they're coming to equity conversation, it's like, you could just go pre-sell some of these contracts and then we can help you finance them, right? Like you have an existing business and you have this big customer coming or a big purchase order or a big thing. There are lots of options to help you using this debt tool to grow. Like there's this this woman in trucking, she had 2 trucks and she was like, hey, I have another customer, but my credit score is like 500. And I need another truck. And I was like, well, if you can go get this contract, then we can actually get you equipment financing to go through it. And she was paying way too much in interest. I'm going to be honest. Like I was like, this is so painful. Like, are you sure you want to do this? But she was able to pay off the truck in 6 months and own it free and clear and grew her revenue by 50% in her company because of a tool that, like, by understanding how the finance worked. Entrepreneurs are great at solving problems. They're not great at understanding finance. And so that's where I do love what we do. It is tempting, wanting to step in and help. But that's where I point to the right, accounting firm that might help them and force them to implement some of those practices. Yeah.
So with your, with contract financing, since you brought it up, what's the LTV on one of those generally?
So there's always 3 variables, and I'm like not answering any of your questions today. I'm always like, oh, there's these rules. I'm always about principles, and people stick to the rules. You can, when they look at the contract, they look at who is the contract with. If it's Walmart, it's one thing. If it's Joe's trucking stop down the street, it's another. So they're looking at who's the payer. They're looking at, what are the terms of the contract? Like, is it guaranteed money? Is it variable pricing? What's there? And then it's looking at your track record historically of being able to fulfill that type of contract. Mm-hmm. So if this is your first purchase order or first contract, debt might not be the solution, unfortunately. Like, I wish it was. I'm trying to find more lenders that it will do that right now. But that's not the main solution.
So are they just disqualifying the borrower?
Yeah, a lot of times, because if you can't show you can fulfill, how do they know they're going to get their money back? Yeah. Right? Again, it's what you look like on paper to lenders, not what you look like in the story to equity.
Yeah, I call it the data points.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing, like, one of the reasons why I like finance so much is it's very emotionless.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, especially founder, right? Founder, entrepreneur types. They're the soul of the company. They're the grit guy. Like, it doesn't matter what happens. They're just going to grind until they're dead, right? Basically. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they're credit worthy.
Oh yeah.
Right? Or they're like,
they're usually not, because they're a founder, right? Like, let's be clear, credit scores are worse because you're not employed or employable.
Right. Right. Or you've taken a risk.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good thing. It's just, the other thing that I love is when you hear a story from a founder about what they're doing on financials, and then when you see the numbers, those don't match a lot of times, a lot of times, whether it's because they're already assuming the pipeline's coming in, or because what's contracted versus realized revenue. Like, that one surprised me. That was the thing that surprised me the most.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of financials that don't make sense, like P&Ls not matching the balance sheet?
Yeah. I would say, if we're talking about if I were to create a consulting firm to help businesses, I would do it in real estate, actually, because real estate financials are the worst of all of them. Like, literally, they just don't know how to build the package of like their financial information. Like, I seriously have considered creating that, just because like it's so bad. Like, this project is amazing. You have everything you need, but you don't have it in a format that any lender will ever talk to you, because it's a waste of their time, because you have the data points, but it took us 3 months to figure out that you had those data points, because you didn't just package it up and deliver.
That's literally what I did when I was doing hard money lending, is I would take their financials and fix them so that I could, because if I didn't, I would take a packet to a private equity group and be like, reject.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, well, what do you need? And then they actually taught me exactly what they want, and I'd go back and rebuild them every time. I used to try and get the client to do it, but that's stupid.
It's really hard. So I'm going to switch industries for a second here. I'm going to take off the initiator hat and talk about CoinLead, because, I've been doing a lot of stuff with sports and helping brands work with athletes. And it's funny because brands do the same thing when it comes to like how they are going to use their money or how they're going to allocate it. I can't tell you the number of brands that we talk to. They're like, we really want to work with professional athletes, and this is how we want to work with them. We'll tee up a professional athlete to walk in the door, pre-qualify everything that's a fit, and then they pitch the athlete, and they will change everything they're talking about. And I know that like it just frustrates me so much, because what people say and what people do are so misaligned, or what they've told us their budget is ahead of time, and then what they tell the athlete when it ends up being a third of that amount, that doesn't go over super well, and it makes us look really, really bad. So it makes you look bad in the lending space, but from a marketing standpoint, it's way worse in that scenario of like, you can't get a CMO from a VP of marketing to the CEO and the CFO to all agree, or to get the CFO to even pay the people that they all have agreed to pay these people. Like, that to me is when we start going to large organizations and not small to medium businesses, like that's a pain point I've been dealing with the past 2 weeks, that I'm like, all right, if I'm going to put my reputation online, or our, CoinLead and some of the things that we're doing, if we're going to bring in these athletes to help you, because you're telling us you need attention, and athletes are a great mechanism to bring attention, don't sacrifice our, reputation in the door. Like, these are like, athletes that people would pay a lot of money to be around. And it's amazing to me how interesting it is. It makes me be like, man, if I'm an athlete, I wouldn't trust anybody. 'Cause
I think that's one of the problems.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Not to mention they hire, not all the time, but they used to hire like their brother basically to run their finances and be their manager and stuff. I think they're pretty much away from that, right?
No.
Oh, they're still doing that?
I mean, I would say they've just bifurcated. So when I see professional athletes, typically what I see is someone next to them that they trust to be kind of the first wave, and they'll vet things on the first wave. And then in the second wave will be either their financial advisor or their agent, whose professional job is to vet those. Sometimes it's 3 layers of the family friend or the dad or the family, then the agent, then the financial advisor, and then you get through. But because of that, most deals actually fail, right? Because working with athletes just isn't worth it if it takes so long to get through that pain point. Just like I talk about pain points with brands, the pain point with the athletes are sometimes just as big there. But I actually think it's a good thing, just because of the seasons. Like, if I'm a football player, right now you want to talk to me, but when I want to get a hold of you in 3 months, you're like, oh, sorry, training camp started. And like, it's impossible to get communication. So it's actually nice to have that family right-hand person, because the agent might not always have the most aligned incentives. They do most of the time, but they might not always want to do an equity deal because they don't get paid on an equity deal. Or they might not want to do the things where an athlete is at the tail end of their career. They've already made a lot of money, and they're like, I want to play the long game. So I see it pretty prevalent. I don't know. You said you've seen it change. What have you seen change?
That they have a little bit more professional
Yeah.
staff around them, right? Like, mostly because like I used to joke kind of candidly, right? Where it's like, guys, don't buy a strip club just because you like to go to one, right? Just go there when you want to go. It's not an investment for you. Same thing with restaurants, right? Like,
oh my gosh, don't get me started. I say that advice to billionaires, right? When we're talking about high net worth individuals, what do they want to get involved in? They want to get involved in film. They want to get involved in restaurants, and they want to get in all the businesses that don't make money.
Yeah.
And it's professional sports teams, right? Like, they look really good now, but if you're buying a sports team now, like, will it do really well? I don't know. Like, they lose money for a whole lot of time, and you hope that the equity goes up. But those are the spaces they all want to get into, because it's how do I change the world so that people can see the way I'm changing the world.
I was on a conference call, I think it was before Thanksgiving or right after Thanksgiving, right, with a couple of NBA players, current guys, and they're so intent on buying MLS teams.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to me, because I'm not one to judge off the bat. I'm more just to like, okay, why are you guys doing that? Like, I want to gather as much data as possible. And their logic is sound, right? It's like, well, Donald Sterling bought the freaking Clippers in
look
92,
at how much the value went up.
Yeah.
Great.
And I'm like, that's a lot of time though.
Don't you think? Yeah. Do you know how much money they lost in that time frame?
Right.
To where it went up in that value?
Right. We even tried to underwrite a deal in Rhode Island for one of like I don't know what you call them, AAA teams for MLS. I don't know, tier down or whatever. And they were raising a lot of money, like $75 million, building the stadium, doing the whole freaking thing. And they did it. They raised it. And it's like, I just don't know how that's going to pan out.
As an investor who I feel like I know what I'm doing, right? When I'm doing venture capital, it's really difficult to talk to people when they tell me what they're doing, knowing that I feel like I could do better of actually vetting what I'm doing. Again, it goes back to that point we talked about earlier, which is like, know what game you're playing when you're playing that game. There are lots of people investing in angel and seed stage venture capital deals, believing those to be private equity, like proven, validated businesses, because the operator has had success in the past. And so therefore they're using that as a proxy of like, this is success. And like, it makes me like want to bang my head against the wall. That's why I started the Utah Tribe Angels, so that investors can talk to other investors about what they're doing and mistakes they've made and how to learn it. So like some people should just allocate to funds. Just know what you know and know what you don't, and just allocate to the people that know what game they're playing and how to execute. And some people want to participate because it's like their fun money. And I'm like, great, but at least know what when you're going to play, or you're walking into the casino and you're like, okay, I'm walking in with $1,000 and I'm, that's all I'm going to spend. Yeah. But what happens is they walk in with $1,000 and they start spending $3,000. And then all of a sudden they're like, but now, and then they, might get a little influenced by the environment there. And, maybe they're drinking and they spend more. The same thing happens in investing. It's like they think they're going in with one intention. They say they have full intention, but then as they go through, they get distracted by what seems fun, what they personally like. How do you take the emotion out of it and make it economical? Evaluate what you're really doing. Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. I had a kid come to my office. He's building a basketball facility. We'll call it that. I don't want to call him out too much, but it's a terrible idea. It's basically the Top Golf of basketball. And So he comes in my office, right? And I think he's there because I own a basketball athletic equipment company, right? So I'm like, I thought I'm selling him some stuff, right?
This is aligned incentives. I'm going to bring him a court.
So 40 minutes into this conversation, it becomes very apparent to me he's pitching me for an investment, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. This is different. I got to change gears.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there talking to him, and I'm like, what does one of these things cost you? He said $250,000. And I go, you probably have $1,300 of material in there. And, he's like, what do you mean? There's no way. And I'm like, dude, are you not aware where you're actually sitting? You're in an athletic equipment manufacturing company.
Yeah.
I can make this in 10 days.
And if you could, you'd be a really good investor, but just providing the product for.
Right. Right. But it was crazy because he was so blind. He had pumped himself up for the pitch, right? And he was just not going to get knocked off of it, right? And as we're going there, he starts talking to me about Topgolf. He doesn't realize I think Topgolf was one of the dumbest investments on the planet, right? It also took 22 years before Callaway bailed him out, And I'm like, I got to stop you there, dude. Like, I think it's a dumb idea. We kept on going into this. And he kept on pitching. And then as his desperation was increasing, it was wild because he goes, listen, Mark, do you want to be a billionaire? And I go, hell no. And it like deflated him, right? And I go, do you know how much freaking time it takes to become a billionaire? I do not want to work 16 hours the rest of my life. So maybe by the time I'm 70, I could hit that. And it like threw him off, right? I'm like, And then he goes in this whole thing. He's like, well, do you want to be on a private jet, flying around the country, having fun with me? And I said to him, I go, it offends me that you'll think I can get on a private jet anytime I want. You're coming to me for money. And he had no idea what to say. And my point with this story is you have to understand what you need, right? And it's kind of going along with your saying, like, what financial tool do you actually need to make this thing work?
Yeah.
And it's hard for me because I want to go into like a mentor apprentice thing with people a lot where I'm like,
how do I help you?
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to give you $1, but if you actually want to go to the next guy, hit these 3 points. Yeah. Right? Because you're just not doing it.
So I this happens a lot to me when I'm talking about those things, and it's interesting. It's really hard not to give the advice that that would save them a step, right? Like, but it's also difficult for them to receive that step because you can anticipate what they're going to run into ahead of time, right? That conversation, I'm pretty sure I already know the company, and I vetted another one that was taking a Topgolf-like approach, but for the gun space. Very interesting. I actually thought it was pretty interesting. But when you could just base back to the way too much regulation, by the way. But when you go back to like the economics and you say, okay, if it is $250,000, how many people do you think you can cycle through? How many do you think you can get there? What utilization would you expect? And you're just going through the basic numbers of like, okay, that assumption is false. Like, there's no way that can happen, and going through that. But the thing that is interesting is for the entrepreneurs or the founders that I see success, that I'm like, they're going to make it. They're taking that conversation to say, oh, you know something I don't know. I have a desire to know everything you know about that. Tell me more. How much do you think you could provide that type of equipment for me? Right? Like, that conversation could have been taken very differently and actually been a successful conversation of like, okay, I didn't get the money, which is my intention to come in, but I did get the understanding that I can actually decrease my costs by 50% by doing this, or 75%, or whatever amount that you said. Yeah. And I actually got a partner that might actually, if they believe in what I'm doing, they might even be able to help me get the equipment in exchange for equity, because I don't have money, but they believe in this concept if it works out, which is the same as getting money.
Absolutely.
Happens to me all the time when they're talking to me, oh, what are you using the money for? Sales and marketing. I'm like, well, what if we could just bring you customers right now? Wouldn't that be better? And they're like, no, it wouldn't be better. I'm like, you're not the right entrepreneur for this opportunity. Like, revenue is the best financing you can get, right? But that intellectual curiosity of being like, okay, being uncomfortable, going back to that point, oh, I don't know something, but you know something. Sometimes, like, investors, we're frustrating. We think we know the answers, or we're going ahead. And sometimes they need to correct us to say, let me go back. You missed a step. You're trying to skip a few. You need to understand A, B, and C. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, what were you going to say? And they can like help us. But if you hear that feedback of the back and forth of, oh, okay, you're not, I'm going through this at times when I'm talking to people about investing in a deal or in a fund or whatever it may be. Oh, you're actually not the right investor for me. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. How can I add value to you, right? Like, we're 15 minutes into the meeting and it's not a fit, but you know something I don't know, and I probably know someone that you don't know. How can I help, right? Yeah. Like, I don't know. I look for that a lot, in that, like, all entrepreneurship is just mad scientists testing out different theories of this works, that works, that doesn't. Yeah. Nobody knows all the answers. We're just figuring it out. So
what's some of the biggest mistakes you see entrepreneurs make?
So I'll point to myself, kind of like biggest mistakes I think I've made, because it's easy to point to others. It's maybe harder to like, I'm going to step up to the plate here and be a real entrepreneur. So some of the things mistakes I've made is when I see initial success, sometimes I don't push down harder on that success, right? Sometimes I'm a little too slow to like go hire 2 more people, even though it probably would help me like not spend so much time and personal effort to like stop things. That's something I need to work on at times, like the scalability of that standpoint. That's ones that I'm getting a lot better at, but it's one in the past that has definitely held back. I think the other one that I had run into is just that fear that comes from, like, I talk about this like all the time, of being willing to fail, right? But that fear that comes into like just not being willing to go out and like sell. I'm a really bad salesperson, like in the sense that I'm always like, if you don't win, I don't want you to have my product, right? Like if I don't help you, right? Like I'm very much like, okay, find the right people, which should make people feel trust, but also like that means that I'm like a little bit slower to be like, you need this. Why don't you, are you stupid? I'm patient with people to be like, you'll learn you need this in about 6 months. Like, okay. Yeah. Like that's probably a mistake of mine, but I'd rather do that than the opposite. It's probably just because of the ecosystem we live in Utah and what I see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm always going to over deliver and under promise. Yeah. So
you brought up something interesting. Your investors, are they mostly in Utah or are they mostly outside?
Historically outside.
Yeah. Same as me.
Yeah.
Do you like Utah investors? That's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. I will say I see some trends here that like there's a cheapness of not being willing to pay people for what they do, and not from a sense of like, oh, I don't want to pay you. It's just a matter of like, well, I can do this. I can do it better. And you're right. I hope you can do it pretty well. But is it worth your time? And most people think they actually don't value their time enough. And so they're not willing to pay other people to do it the same ways. And I might delay paying someone else as an employee that I just talked about. I need to value my time better so I can allocate the resources. Yeah. For investment, that's guaranteed, right? Like most people that want to deploy their own money, they're like, I'm going to start a multifamily office so that I can bring in other people's money and do it because I'm the investor. I'm like, no, you're an operator. You're not an investor. So I would say that that's my overall perspective from like the high level down. Yeah. From the bottoms up, I see a lot of people wanting to invest, but we're very connected, but not maybe very discerning of like, what is this investment I'm really doing?
See, I feel like in Utah, for me, I call it the entrepreneur arc, right? Where you go from entrepreneur to a CEO. Mm-hmm. No one can do it. And so I feel like Utah has a very entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of companies are founders to sell, to exit, right? And really when you're looking for an investor, especially for a sophisticated fund, right? You want guys, well, you want them high net worth individuals, number one, right? But you need a level of sophistication with them that they're fine not knowing what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like there's a tad bit of an arrogance inside of Utah with investors where you ask them for your, to raise money for your fund. You kind of explain what the objectives are and what we're going to do with it and kind of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You're like, well, can I have a board seat? No,
you
could not have a board seat.
Let me ask this question. Do you add value to the board, right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you add to the evaluation of the fund or the board or whatever?
Yeah.
And it's a sense of control, right? Like, that's okay. So I don't know. I try not to say anything bad. I actually think some of that stems from trying to figure out what to say and what not to say.
And my thing here is it's not to talk bad about Utah investors. It's more to raise awareness, right? To where it's like, hey guys, there's stages of your career, and when you get to those certain stages, these are the doors that open for you. But when they open, accept them.
Yes. Yeah. I would say most of that stems from us not having large publicly traded companies that set the real standard for the space, set the real standard for salaries, set the real standard for opportunity cost for starting a company, set the real standard of what is management at scale. Because without that, like those pillars that do that, we have some, right? But we don't have enough. We glorify entrepreneurship. And when we do that, then what happens is those that see the success, they're like, I'm going to take my chips off, like you said, for $10 million and say, oh, you could have made 60. Like, that's what incentivizes, because that person probably would have been more comfortable in a corporate environment is actually what that tells me. And so I think that when we have those pillars and balance on the large enterprise publicly traded companies and the entrepreneurship success that we have, that's where we get that balance. And it kind of sets also the investors, because what happens is then they are board members of a publicly traded company and they don't need to be involved in this plaything called private equity or venture capital. It's not worth their time. Again, their time is so valuable at a bigger company affecting changes where one small change can affect something bigger. And so some of that has to do with sustained success with those publicly traded companies, and some of that has to do with their. So like, I'm nobody, right? I have to recognize that, like, when I say this, I'm just really good at learning new industries and recognizing what happens. And so my job is to recognize patterns. I see 200 deals a month over and over, and I see ecosystems and I study these about what made San Francisco successful. Well, we can't follow the same path as San Francisco. So what will make us successful? I go study the history of, I think Park City is actually what made Utah successful historically, because of the ties to the ecosystem, right? When we talk about WordPerfect and Novell, and when they exited, well, they brought in retired venture capitalists who retired in Park City to come get involved and start reinvesting that money into the local ecosystem. Without that, we're probably halfway to where we're currently at, without those key insights and key ecosystems. So I really study what changes an ecosystem, what makes them successful. And so that's my, scientist, statistics, whatever evaluation as a peon in this ecosystem who hasn't really accomplished very much when I look at the grand scheme.
When you look at that, though, what would you advise Utah to do? As an ecosystem, not
that's a really hard question for someone as small as me. I would say...
Yeah, but in 10 years, this soundbite will be awesome.
Yeah, in 10 years, this is going to be a great soundbite. I think it somewhat has to stem with the founders that are building companies now. And it's saying, don't just stop, right? Like, it should be about when you go public and once you've been successful, how do you continue to drive this? And historically, I would say we've gone to a point where it's like, okay, try to sell the company, try to get public. And it's more like, think bigger. The same way that venture capitalists might say, hey, you need to think bigger about what you're going after. I think that private equity and public markets could say the same thing about Utah, of like, you need to think bigger. How do you be a $5 billion valuated company, right? How do you be a $10 and $20 billion company, and having the people that have the aspirations to go after that for the right reasons? And it's not so that you can, be the talking head that everyone listens to, but to like realize the trickle down effects that has to the whole ecosystem. And so that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen pretty soon, and I'm really excited to watch it. But I would say that it comes from the entrepreneurs that are right now. They're probably 2 to 5 years into their careers of the startup or in the build journey, and they're continually learning now. And so when they have that goal in mind rather than this goal, then they're learning the things for 5 and 10 years in the future now so that they're prepared. And so I think it just has to be with like perpetual learning and not always about like what you're doing today. You're learning for 3 and 5 years ahead. Like I'm preparing to be a firm managing director, right? And that means I don't consider myself a firm until I have 3 funds. And so I haven't even successfully raised my first fund. I've done 45 venture deals. I've done whatever expectations, but I'm treating myself as if I'm already preparing myself to be on my 3rd fund. And so I'm thinking, acting, and demonstrating so that I can be successful there. Yeah. So I think it's the same way. Like it's a hard thing. Like that's a lifelong journey for asking people to run a publicly traded company for a sustainable period of time. And I think our talent is getting better and better there. So that's once we reach that point, we will know that we've made it, because also then salaries have to keep up. And so people aren't doing entrepreneurship out of necessity. They're doing it because they would do this for free.
Yeah. What do you think about incubation here? I feel like we do a really poor job of incubation.
I think there's a lot of new incubation happening right now.
Is there?
There's a lot of new accelerators, a lot of new incubators, venture studio models. I think it's a very interesting concept. It depends what you mean by incubation, but I would just say none of those models have ever proven they've been successful. Y Combinator could argue that they have been, but look at their success rate. And so the question is that success or is it not? Accelerators, venture studios, they're all just funds in a different form. But instead of investing, they're just building. So I think we do a really good job of just validating quickly. And so in that sense, Utah's done the best job in incubation of just validating that you can get people to pay for it. It just happens to be that they're getting people like their friends from other companies to pay for it, and not because we're so well connected. Yeah. So
I feel like one of the things in Utah that drives me nuts is when your friend starts a business, you want him to discount the services to you instead of just get your butt in there and tip everybody and like really actually support the business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's a balance there. If you're willing to actually spend time with them, extremely valuable to the founder.
Yeah.
If you're going to spend time to tell me what do you need it to look like so that you would pay full price, and you're my first 3 to 5 customers, I like that. I think it's great. Yeah. Like teach me what you want, but I'm going to meet with you once or twice a week, and you're telling me what sucks about this experience, because it will suck. Yeah. And B2B SaaS, I like that. Yeah. Consumer products, no way. Shouldn't discount anything to anybody ever, because it's what it should be. After that, I'm all for not doing that. But it's also our own fault, right? Like sell outside of the state and go actually validate that you actually have a market. Right. That's okay. Like it's okay if you have a lower success rate, because you know that people are actually saying yes because they want your product and not because Mark and I have a relationship. And
yeah, my friend's mom is currently trying to sell her business, and she's in the carbon industry basically.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The problem is she's 70. It's all her.
Yeah.
It's all relationships for her. The second she's done, every one of those relationships move to big boxes or whatever, right?
Maybe.
Oh, no, 100%. Or she'd sell the thing tomorrow. That's the biggest holdup, right? She's too small too. She doesn't do enough.
So buying boring businesses is like the hottest topic in finance in my mind right now. Yes. If you talk to any MBA, what are they doing? A search fund, right? I have someone that put in 6 offers to buy businesses and has in the last 6 months and hasn't had a successful exit at all to be able to buy any of them. And these are like companies doing $2 to $7 million. So I know private equity isn't interested whatsoever. Yeah. It's just interesting to me. I'm all about aligning incentives and structuring deals. I'm like right now coordinating a deal with one of my friends to say, hey, let's bring you into this business. Let's just have you work in the business and you'll earn your equity over time to do this thing. And then it functions as a great transition period for them, for those people that are actually willing to do work. There's a lot of people that just want to buy it. Oh, this is going to be my cash flow tool. I'm like, no, you're buying it because you're going to work in the business.
Yeah.
There's someone I'd want to introduce her to that runs another carpet company that's doing, 5 million in revenue right now. And they're in the day to day. It's the owner operator, right? The same way, and be like, oh, there might be a relationship there, or
we should absolutely connect them.
Or it might be the answer is promoting someone from internal to just sell or finance the thing and just be like, look, do you trust anyone in this company? And if you do, why wouldn't they be the one? I know you want your money now, but it's not worth anything if you just get rid of it.
Well, and part of my question with that too is like when I look at businesses, I want to run them to 25 million in revenue as fast as possible, because then you have economies of scale in there, right?
Yeah.
But then you also have a sellable business.
True.
But I mean, do you see that with some of the smaller companies?
No, I think there's every private equity firm in the world is coming to me right now saying, hey, do you know anybody doing any business that they have 5 million EBITDA or more? I'm like, do you care about industry? Do you provide certain value? And they're like, no, we don't really care. I'm like, okay, that tells me there's a whole heck of a lot of buyers out there for any company that can reach any semblance of scale. And they're like, oh, we'll even come down to 2 million of EBITDA, right? Like, I think there's a huge space. Like, there's a space from 0 to 1. If we're talking about like service businesses, I'm ignoring venture. Businesses that make money, 0 to 1, get to that 0 to 1 revenue standpoint. There's a space for 1 to 5. There's opportunities to buy those companies at 1 and grow it to 5 and sell it. And there's opportunities to grow from 5 to 15, 5 to 20. And I think there's 3 tiers there, that there are buyers that they just repeated the same process in that stage over and over again. And they're like, we're good at this. And then we know we're going to sell it to a private equity firm or strategic, or we have an insurance group that just wants to buy up a bunch of companies that do this. And if we get them to this stage, they already told us they'll buy anything we get to this threshold. And so I know why you would do that, because it's not worth your time, which tells me you're applying the things we're talking about. But for other people, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there. And those that recognize what they're good at, it's like amazing. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you look at every businesses for an exit, or do you look at businesses for legacy?
I wish I could look for them for legacy. I'm not there yet in my career. I think it takes... I look at my community, Tribe Angels, like legacy for the mission that it builds. I have to treat it like a nonprofit, not like a business, because it's an event business. And if I treat it like a business, I will get frustrated that it can't scale fast enough. And so that's my legacy of like how I'm trying to connect the culture of Utah and investors. But I can't, for the legacy standpoint of like businesses that could forever just cash flow in that space, I'm not there yet. It's also not my skill set.
Yeah.
Like,
I've looked on it up and down, and I cannot get my head around not exiting.
Yeah.
You know, like for example, like I don't want to pass any of my companies down to my kids.
Yeah. I worked for a company that did it the right way. They put it into a trust, and the trust gave a certain of the profits of the company back to the company to grow the number of employees. And then this much was allocated to the generations. They were on the 3rd and 4th generations, and it was enough that the family and kids got something, but they all had to work. Like they all had to like get their own jobs at another company. And that was like awesome. I was so impressed. It was Savage Companies locally. Just give them a shout out for doing it the right way. I was very impressed with that. I agree with you on the legacy standpoint. My kids are young enough that I'm like, I'm not thinking much about it right now.
I don't want to chain them to it.
Yeah. Well,
more than anything, right?
My dad has asked me for the past 10 years, are you sure you don't want to come work in my business? No, I'm sorry. I can't.
Yeah. Let them do their own thing.
Yeah.
So, well, my friend, we're at the end of this bad boy.
We talked for a long time. Sorry.
So I always have everyone end with their best advice.
Can you give me someone I'm giving the advice to? Like,
give it to your kids.
Okay.
Pretend they're going to hear it in 15 years.
It's a lot different advice. Okay. So I think my advice for my kids would be as you fail, you have to take a step back and think about what you learn. Actually, I'm going to change it. I'm going to change my advice. I think most advice is better for yourself. Like, we're really good at giving advice as people. We're really bad at applying it. And I think that's a principle I've been applying in my life recently is when I'm struggling with a decision, I have to somehow remove myself from that situation and give advice to myself as if I'm somebody else, right? Like, it's a weird thing to say, but like to treat myself like a foreign entity and say, hey, this is what I would tell you to do. What it does is it removes you from the emotion of that. And my kids wouldn't understand that at this point because my oldest is 7. But like, if you're an athlete and you like miss a shot, you know, what would you tell yourself if you missed a shot? Well, that's the right advice to take, not the one where you get upset about what happens and like get frustrated with yourself. It's like, no, you're going to go get back on defense. Or if you failed in some business, giving yourself the advice that you would give others helps you make the right decisions. So that's something I'm learning, and I hope that I can pass that on a little bit.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Landon, thanks for coming on, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the President McCormack Podcast, brought to you by McCormack Foundation, Saxton Fund, ADP Lemco, and Professional Floor Systems. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and keep up with Mark on Instagram @President McCormack.